The ever-evolving truth now brings you the conclusion of our Unholy Trinity of Cults series, The Manson Family, Volume 2. In 1967, Charles Manson, a troubled little man with a very big personality and very dangerous ideas, was released from prison where he had already spent half his life and began to amass a cult following of troubled youth in Los Angeles, which eventually and infamously became known as the murderous Manson Family. In this second and final volume, we dig into Tom O'Neill's mindbender of a book, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. We will also do the full treatment on the Bobby Beausoleil copycat theory, as well as the controversies around Lotsa Papa. We offer some extremely creepy audio from Manson and the girls, and we round things out with final thoughts on all things Manson. Don't cease to exist. Be here right now with us.
Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the Ever-Evolving Truth. My name is Jeff. I'm here with Sterner, Leah, and Mounts. And this is the Volume 2 of the Manson cult coverage to officially finish up our Unholy Trinity of Cults series.
It's finally come to this.
It had to be Manson, because I still stand by if it weren't for the Manson family, there'd be no Jonestown, or at least it wouldn't be in the news. They were the first real big cult, I think.
He certainly is the most famous of all the cult leaders. I think it's because it's wrapped up in the Beatles. It's wrapped up in the 60s and Flower Power. It's wrapped up in Roman Polanski, the end of the innocence of the 60s. Mm-hmm. And just Manson himself is an incredibly striking individual. You heard a little bit of Manson last week, but you're going to hear more audio clips of Manson in this episode, and this was, decades after they were put away. So it'll be interesting to hear him from a different perspective, with Diane Sawyer getting very agitated about certain things. So we'll hear that. But the main thing, the reason we decided to do a two-parter is because last week we went over the helter-skelter theory, which for anyone that has not caught up yet and heard that, that was the theory that Manson believed there would be a race war in which the black man would rise up against the white man, and the white race would be destroyed, only for Charlie and his family to rise out of the desert from the bottomless pit they were hiding in and rule over the black man, and that would be the new order of things. Having been told this, he felt by the Beatles, according to the helter-skelter theory, mayhem ensued, murders happened, and the entire involved members of the Manson family were sentenced to death. Now, this week, we are going to go into some of the alternate theories. Where we're going to start in this first segment is the book by Tom O'Neill, which, do you have the official title on that? I know it's Chaos.
It is, hold on, damn it, I have it right here. It is Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the History of the 60s.
Right. So this is a book by Tom O'Neill. Now, Tom O'Neill initially started off wanting to write a magazine article. Oh, really quick, before we go into this, there was a slight correction I wanted to make from last week. We said that Manson only had one documented son, Charles Manson Jr. Turns out he actually has three documented sons, Charles Manson Jr., Valentine Michael Manson, who was by Mary Bruner, the first Manson girl, and named after a character in Manson's literary favorite, Stranger in a Strange Land, and also Charles Luther Manson. So we wanted to get that right. I'm sure he had dozens of other children from many other women, but those are the three official ones.
Mm-hmm. Nobody really knows who the fathers of those babies were in that family.
Right. But Tom O'Neill, I had never heard of him before this book, and he's gained a lot of steam since doing a very widely watched Joe Rogan interview. The notes that we're working off for this show will be from his straight interview. But we are actually, Tom O'Neill had originally decided to do a magazine article for Premiere, trying to find a new angle on the Manson family. And that magazine article that he attempted to start in 1999 turned into a 20-year obsession in which he dove so deep into the Manson story that he eventually developed what can only be called absolutely crazy, wild theories everything from MK Ultra involvement, mind control, Manson being a CIA asset. However, there is enough intriguing things in this book, which we'll go into at great length here, to really make you think. In the end, I think O'Neill grasps at more straws than he mines diamonds. But there's some interesting stuff. Leah, what was your overall take on the book?
Well, it's hard for me. So I love me a good conspiracy theory, and I love me a good Manson story. So entertainment wise, I really enjoyed it. And I don't know if, first, I want to make this clear. I think it's very important to understand that it does not matter whether Manson was a CIA asset or if Manson was just a crazy guy that spent his life in jail. He is still guilty of these crimes. It does not matter.
He still led people to kill.
He led people to kill, and the killers committed the murders. It's the motive that we're talking about here, and It's very important. And what I took from it, which I kind of knew beforehand, is that Vincent Bugliosi is icky. Probably was one of the most icky human beings on the planet, and I was fascinated to hear just how icky he was.
Right. We're going to go into the accusations against Bugliosi made in this book. This has been the strongest criticism of Bugliosi I've ever seen. Bugliosi had quite a powerful reputation for many years. A little bit of background on him really quick, because you're going to hear some very unflattering things about Bugliosi in this breakdown that we do. I've always respected him. I thought he was a pit bull of a prosecutor, almost undefeated except for one case. Out of 106, I believe he successfully prosecuted 105 federal cases.
And he did 105 federal cases, and the one case that he did not get the full conviction on, they still were found guilty, but of a lesser count.
Right. Bugliosi is actually more famous. He's most famous for being the prosecutor that put Charles Manson and the Manson girls away, as well as the other associates. But he's become a very famous true crime writer. Helter Skelter, I believe 76, that was released. That was his first big hit, sold over 7 million copies. Still the best-selling true crime book of all time. He also wrote Reclaiming History about the JFK assassination, which is, including the endnotes, 2,700 pages long or 2,300 pages long.
Which is the book that made me think he was icky. So keep going.
Well, Bugliosi strongly believed that Oswald acted alone. He used the Warren Commission as his primary reference material, and it is a controversial book. He also wrote Outrage about the O.J. Simpson case, and he wrote a book about George Bush that basically the thesis of that book, or the main theme of that book, was that Bush should be tried for war crimes and should be sentenced to death as a mass murderer.
Which was the only thing that made me have a little bit of respect for the man.
So Leah keeps going back and forth depending on what Vince does or what he gets up to here. But let's talk a little bit about Vince Bugliosi, just a very light bio on him, just so you get a little bit of color if you haven't been familiar with that name before. Bugliosi was the assistant district attorney at the time of the Tate LaBianca murder trials. Obviously, we said he's best known for that. In 1972, he left the DA's office after never having successfully achieved the level of district attorney. He was always deputy or assistant district attorney. He left in 72. As I said, he twice ran for the DA's office, was not elected, partially because of some damaging material that came out from these stories that we're going to go into in just a few minutes. And he wrote Helter Skelter, 74 that was. I said 76.
76 was the movie.
Okay, that's right, the TV movie, which is, I love that movie.
So do I. It's so good.
Was that the first thing that turned you on to the Manson story?
No, it was, I got turned on to it in like 1994 with the Diane Sawyer interview with Manson and his co-defendants. That was the first thing I saw with Manson.
I see. So this was Helter Skelter, the TV movie, was the first thing I saw, the first thing that made me understand anything about Manson. But a little bit about Bugliosi's life. He was born in 1934 in Hibbing, Minnesota. That's an all-American boy right there. He graduated from UCLA School of Law, and he was president of his class. Very, very smart man, Bugliosi. Very aggressive too. Even if you hear him talk, he's got kind of a high-pitched barking chirp of a voice. Is that a good way to describe it?
It is, and pompous. He oozes Pumpicity.
Yeah, and I'll go with you on that word.
I
think it's correct. I heard him on an interview just last night. I was doing some last second research. I heard him on an interview with Geraldo Rivera, and as Geraldo's trying to cut to break, Bugliosi will not let him go to break until he answers affirmatively the question that Bugliosi was asking him.
Yeah.
So he didn't take no for an answer very often, which is why he had those 105 out of 106 full victories. He did die in 2015 of cancer, and Bugliosi, his reputation has taken quite a shellacking here in the years since his death. A lot of people are saying a lot of negative things. I find it a little bit suspicious that all of that is coming out after his death. Some people, including Tom O'Neill, have justified that based on, basically saying it was a coincidence. But let's go in without any further ado. Let's go to this book, Chaos, by Tom O'Neill. Unless you had anything else on either Bugliosi or Tom O'Neill at the outset here, Leah.
I don't. I just wanted to, one thing, if you don't know anything about this, really, really good interview with Tom O'Neill that we won't be referencing is on the Joe Rogan podcast. Definitely check that out. It is worth a listen.
Yes.
And I think, are you going to start with the shooting of Lhasa Papa? Is that where we're going to go?
No, we'll wait until the second segment to talk about the theories around the motive being all about Beausoleil and Manson's shooting of the drug dealer Lhasa Papa. But we'll go to that in segment 2. So we can spend all our time on Chaos for now.
Okay.
If that's good with you.
I'm good. You good? Yeah.
So basically, this is an interview, a very great, extensive interview by Adrian Mack of Straight.com. 50 years after the Manson murder, Tom O'Neill's disturbing new book, Chaos, seems to dismantle the myths of Helter Skelter. So a couple of notes that I've highlighted here. This is directly pulled from the interview. So what I'm saying are quotes from that interview by Adrian Mack. But I will tell you if I drift into my own commentary on it. So this isn't quite news, says Mack, to anyone with a sincere interest in the events of that hot, mad summer when the so-called hippie murder death cult slaughtered starlet Sharon Tate and her friends, Wojciech Frykowski, Jay Sebring, the famous hairstylist to the stars, and Abigail Folger, the heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, along with the very unlucky Stephen Parent. The next day, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca were murdered in their Los Feliz home with the same appalling savagery. I insert a comment here that Tom O'Neill spends a ton of time in this book interviewing former drug associates of Wojciech Frykowski, allegedly.
A ton. Like
a ton.
Really, and I will say in the book, what I do like about it and dislike at the same time is he did not pussyfoot around who the victims were. He was fine with there's this kind of myth and mythology and this legend about the 5 people in that house in 10050 Cielo Drive, right?
Right.
He doesn't keep that myth going. Like, he lets you know, like, these were crazy, wild people. They were not these perfect Hollywood people that you think of. They were, and I like that. I think that was smart because.
Well, nobody wants to hear you blame the victims to begin with. And yes, these were swingers in the 60s. You know, maybe I don't know the extent of the swinging that Polanski and Tate did, although there appears to have been some. But certainly they didn't bring upon this savagery and this brutality. So yes, you're right. O'Neill does. He introduces it. He talks for a long time about it, but he never comes out and blames any of the victims for their death. The main thing is he goes into some lurid details about how wild the parties at the Tate Polanski residence got, and how sometimes people associated with that drug scene got wild, had to be ejected, sometimes by Polanski himself, which brought up the idea of a revenge killing by either a drug associate other than the Manson family or even Tex Watson related.
Well, there's that. And the other one that they brought up that I thought was fascinating was Polanski was dead set on the fact that it was John Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas, because Polanski had slept with Michelle Phillips. And that was what they really thought at one point. But go ahead.
Polanski did a lot of his own investigation right after this happened, including walking around the murder scene with a psychic, coming up with a lot of theories, because he was in that Hollywood scene. He knew how dark it got. He knew how crazy it got. And I'm sure if I were Polanski at the time, I would have been suspecting a lot of those people in my inner circle. The most lurid part about this, I mentioned, while it's fascinating, this never really goes beyond loose conjecture, which is the same as his mention of Bugliosi allegedly telling him about the tapes that were found, the security tapes at the residence.
The security tapes. I thought you meant the Tex Watson tapes, but go ahead.
No. That'll come later. The Tex Watson tapes were really these tapes that Tex Watson statements, hours and hours of statements from Tex Watson to his attorney, which are sealed by the Justice Department pending further Manson investigations, I guess, about murders that we don't know about yet. That's the reason they're giving for keeping them under wraps, in spite of many people, including Leslie Van Houten, trying to get them unearthed so they can be heard. The official statement of the Justice Department is that they do not reveal anything new. But the tape I was talking about, Leah, were these tapes of allegedly Sharon Tate having sex with multiple men while Roman Polanski filmed it, indicating Polanski was darker than we already know he was, and that his wife found her end as a result of his violent world and his crazy environment. The former drug world figures that he talks to now are old, decrepit, crazy men who are making wild claims that hint at not only themselves, but also Bugliosi and everybody else they could think of being controlled by the CIA. I thought this part was very interesting, but pretty weak as anything new. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I didn't really fall into that part of it. I didn't see any significant ties. I really thought he was trying to get to a point saying, like, you know, because of Wojtek and because of Polanski and these drug people, they somehow hired these drug people with them, hired the Manson family to kill these people. It kind of felt like that's what he was trying to get at. And I'm not buying that. I couldn't pick that up.
Right. It was pretty weak. It kind of goes all over the place. One of the main criticisms of O'Neill's book is that he tries to explore too many theories, and it just gets confusing after a while, which we'll get into a couple more here. But obviously I mentioned the going story is this helter-skelter theory. We did the whole episode last week on it through the filter of that helter-skelter theory. What O'Neill is saying is that really hasn't been the real story. He said Bugliosi's theory was riddled with loose ends, and one of the prosecutor's clumsiest contrivances, that's the verbiage in this article, concerned Terry Melcher. Now, Terry Melcher, as we know, was the record producer who was associated with Manson, allegedly recorded Manson. There seems to be some debate over how involved he was. He was the son of movie star Doris Day, and really involved heavily in the scene. According to the official count, the location of the Tate murders was chosen to send a decisive and terrifying message to Melcher, the former resident at 10050 Cielo Drive, where the killings took place, and the man who he famously auditioned and then rejected Charles Manson for the record deal. So basically, they chose that house to scare the fuck out of Terry Melcher, right? That's the going theory in the helter-skelter idea. So my comment here was, if true, this could have been assumed to be a sort of bonus for Manson in the larger carrying out of the race war. Manson himself said that Tex Watson chose that resident because he had been there before, most likely when Melcher owned it, and he chose it because he knew where it was and decided to murder that night, not at Manson's command, according to Manson. Between Bugliosi and Beausoleil, it's hard to go through all these names.
It is.
But the Bobby Beausoleil scenario contradicts this, unless Manson means he sent them out to do copycat crimes, but didn't select the Tate house for them and didn't know necessarily that a massacre at this level would have occurred. So here's what we find out about Terry Melcher in this book. So let me just skip over a little bit here.
The Terry Melcher stuff is fascinating, and this is where you really find out why Bugliosi has a reason to hide all this. But go ahead.
Right. So if Terry Melcher knew the Manson family better than it was that he testified to
under oath,
under oath, he said he only was out to Manson's ranch one time to hear him perform music and potentially have recorded him. But the story in this book, according to comments made by the Straight State member, former associate of the Manson family, Danny DiCarlo, and Paul Watkins, who we talked about last week, former associate of the Manson family, eventually was a big part of Bugliosi's helter-skelter theory. So in 2003, Tom O'Neill, the author of Chaos, scored what is called a haunting interview with none other than Melcher himself. O'Neill says, I think he met with me, that is Melcher, thinking he could do damage control during a call to the Georgia Strait from Philadelphia. And when you read that chapter in the book, what he did was threaten these enormous lawsuits against me, threatened to throw my briefcase off the roof, and then in the same breath asked me to write his memoir with him. O'Neill's quote is, he was basically selling his mother down the river, remarks O'Neill with a mirthless laugh, describing the dissolute character he encountered as looking like this boy who never really grew up, overweight, dark glasses, long hair, and drunk in the middle of the day when I went to see him. He said, Terry Melcher said, people thought Doris was this girl next door, and she wasn't. And I said, Terry, I just basically questioned everything you ever testified to under oath, and you want me to be your official biographer? And he says, yeah. And then you can just forget this trash and write a book with me. So prior to this, Terry Melcher had done one Rolling Stone interview in 1974 to promote his solo album. Then he went pretty much off the grid. Now, 30 years later, he's being confronted with evidence from more than one official source who say that he returned to the Manson ranch after the murders. Okay, now, if that's true, Terry Melcher wasn't. How scared could he have been of the Manson family? If he was still associated with them, and if he was more strongly associated with them than is testified to under oath, then what else about this whole story is potentially untrue?
And what's interesting, that there's some things, like you said, that little Polly and DiCarlo had they wouldn't have talked about it beforehand, and they were so close together. And the one story was that Melcher was there after the murders had been committed, and he had taken acid, and that he was on his knees begging Manson to forgive him for what he's done to him. That, in different ways, but the same story was told by two people that would not have a reason to collude. That's
right. And when O'Neill reached out to Stephen Kay, who was Bugliosi's co-prosecutor, and revealed this information to him, Stephen Kay said, this throws a different light on everything. I just don't know what to believe now. Kay still maintains their guilt, as you said, Leah, as we do too, as everybody seems to do. But Kay said, I'm shocked. I never heard a lot of the stuff that you're saying. These statements by Watkins and DiCarlo were quashed. They were hidden, but O'Neill found them in copies of Vince Bugliosi's own notes. And when he went to Bugliosi to challenge him on this, Bugliosi said he had no memory of that whatsoever.
And the other important thing to know really quickly is that Tom asked Kay, would this affect their guilty verdicts? And Kay said, absolutely. Suborning perjury like this is so big that it would, at the very least, get them all new trials if it were true. And Bugliosi would potentially be looking at the death penalty, because it was a death penalty case. And if a lawyer suborns perjury in a death penalty case and they're found guilty, that lawyer is then up for potentially capital punishment for doing that.
Could you imagine just the surreal madness of Vince Bugliosi being brought on trial for murder in like 2013 or whatever?
Can you imagine? It would have been amazing.
It would have been something crazy out of an alternate universe.
Right.
But so now we start getting really thick in the weeds here in Chaos. So we talk about Reeve Whitson. So here's, I'll just read from this will be easier than me trying to summarize. I'm just going to read directly from this section of the interview. Here's a single morsel at one point. Chaos has the Oscar-winning visual effects cinematographer for Star Wars, Richard Edlund, pondering his enigmatic friend Reeve Whitson, whose job, it seems, was to infiltrate hippie groups for U.S. intelligence. Whitson's social circle also included U.S. Air Force General Curtis LeMay and notorious SS officer Otto Skorzeny. I'm sure I'm butchering that. This was obviously no ordinary long hair. His former wife and his only child were convinced that he had been working for the CIA. This is according to O'Neill. She got to know him for the first time in her life in her early 20s, and when he died, she said, "I still don't know who he was or what he did." The author received a suggestive, neither confirm nor deny response when he pressed the agency, the CIA, for records of Whitson's employment. That being said, that's what you get if you asked about anybody. O'Neill suspects Edlund and his wife were motivated by the same questions when they spoke up about their old acquaintance Reeve Whitson, then an influential behind-the-scenes figure in the film industry. They knew that what they were telling me was explosive, he said, and I think they did it because they were as mystified as everyone else by who Reeve was and what he told them before his death. They were hoping that I might find out the answers to it. What Whitson revealed to the couple, along with his attorney and other notable Hollywood insiders, was, according to O'Neill, devastating. It not only undermined the myth of Helter Skelter, it completely shattered it. Just a couple years before he died, O'Neill begins, Reeve told them that his greatest regret was that he had infiltrated the Manson family on an operation that he wasn't allowed to discuss, and that he could have prevented Sharon Tate's murder. But even more shocking was that he told them that he'd been to the crime scene after the murders were committed, but before the police arrived. This was pretty stunning information. O'Neill received corroboration on that last point from Sharon Tate's friend and personal photographer, Shiroke Hatami. Speaking publicly about the murders for the first time since the trial, Hatami claimed that a distraught Reeve Whitson informed him of Tate's death by phone 90 minutes before the bodies were discovered at 10050 Cielo Drive by the Polanski's maid. Moreover, Whitson and Bugliosi floated threats of deportation in order to persuade the Iranian national to falsely testify that he'd seen Manson at Cielo Drives months earlier. Remember that from our last episode that we had said Manson may have met Tate very briefly when he was looking for Melcher at that house. Hatami says, I was framed by Mr. Whitson. Basically, I was forced to testify to this. Hatami tells O'Neill, who notes that Whitson is only mentioned in passing in Helter Skelter. Bugliosi would later claim to O'Neill he didn't recall the name. Okay? Now, we go into COINTELPRO and Chaos. While the FBI ran COINTELPRO, an effort to target, discredit, and disable leftist groups and civil rights leaders, a concurrent program was illegally launched by the CIA to achieve the same ends. It lends its evocative name to O'Neill's book, Operation Chaos. The head of the UCLA's psychiatric department, Dr. Louis Jolin West, also more familiar to people, the name would be Jolly West, who had long been associated with the mind control experiments of MK Ultra. Do you have any thoughts on old Jolly West from reading this in this book about MK Ultra, mind experiments, giving LSD to elephants, all kinds of stuff? Any general thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think it's one of those theories that I find fascinating. I think it's pretty much been proven that MK Ultra was an actual thing. We know this, and especially in the late '60s, Sirhan Sirhan, the summer before,
the assassin of Robert F. Kennedy.
Yes, and which was the summer before, or the fall before the Manson murders, and there's a lot of actual kind of evidence that Sirhan Sirhan was somehow involved. Same with Oswald. So I don't necessarily think that it is a possibility. I think it is a definite possibility. However, what I couldn't get at is why exactly they would want Manson to, why use him? Why not, if you're going to MK Ultra somebody, use it for something else. It's usually, to assassinate a president. Why go and slaughter a grocery store owner and his wife and a couple of quasi-famous people?
I think it's the weakest part of the book, actually. It's fascinating stuff about Jolly West. There's some fascinating stuff about Reeve Whitson. The Reeve Whitson, that's a very weird connection with Hatami, which Hatami did back up to a certain degree. So we don't know who Reeve Whitson was, but Reeve Whitson may have been nothing more than a con man who weaseled his way into this the Manson story, or weaved his way into the Manson family, and then was on the fringes of what happened, and then informed Hatami from there. He does nothing to to really effectively tie MK Ultra, Jolly West, or the CIA to anything that really happened with Manson. Now, West did, of course, deny his involvement in illegal mind control activities until his death. I found it because O'Neill says I found it because he mistakenly left some documents in his files. After a summer of miserable, tedious digging, he found correspondence between MK Ultra head Sidney Gottlieb and West to indicate that West was a part of it. Now, oddly enough, okay, we can go over a little bit of this. O'Neill said, I had the sixth sense that there would be something in those files. When I found it, it was a real eureka moment. But it also made me have to look at the JFK assassination, his relationship as a psychiatrist to Lee Harvey Oswald's killer, Jack Ruby. And, you can't learn that this guy is secretly working for the CIA the very year that he's also treating Jack Ruby and the very day that Jack Ruby has a psychotic break, indicating that West was involved in some kind of weird-ass mind control hypnotism of Ruby, which turned him into a lunatic. But again, we talked about this really being not very compelling. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, really quick. One thing I will say is, as Greg mentioned in the beginning of this, Bugliosi wrote a book about the JFK assassination and was adamant about the fact that Oswald acted alone. And that, for me, this wasn't in the book, but I kind of was like, maybe that's the tie, like that why Bugliosi did the JFK book was to cover, the MK Ultra stuff. He didn't want anybody to know because he knew that Manson was MK Ultra. Like, to me, that's kind of like that he was almost a CIA asset, but that was just me kind of speculating there. And I think that would make a little bit of sense, but not.
Well, Tom O'Neill certainly believes that Bugliosi was compromised by the CIA.
Yeah,
he absolutely believes that, according to what's in the book here. A comment I made about all this stuff really, the part for me that's weird, the weirdest part about the whole story, and the only solid evidence for someone on the inside of law enforcement actually protecting Charles Manson and his family, specifically Charlie and Susan Atkins, from serving long jail sentences and getting them released after clear and significant parole violations. There's really no good explanation for this, except sometimes I wrote in my own note here, the simple truth is still the truth. Roger Smith, who was Manson's parole officer, had taken a liking to Charlie and the girls and was at the same time, he was part of several research studies. He may have been CIA affiliated, that's possible, but he was part of several research studies about criminals and their environment and rehabilitation. It's possible that before Manson and the girls became the legendary and notorious murderous family, that a letter from a former parole officer who was still in good standing, especially back in the 60s when things were a lot more lax than they are now, was enough to allow these parolees to walk free, even though they may have had to answer charges at a later time. What did you make of this idea they kept getting released from prison, Leah? You're on mute again.
That the killers would get released from prison? Is that?
Yeah, that Susan and Charlie got that were very clear parole violations way before the murders, and they just kept getting released. And because of Roger Smith's involvement and the letters that he wrote.
Now, I don't know that I buy that. So here's my other thing. I'm not sure that the Smith thing is even really why they kept getting out and getting away with it.
What do you think it is?
I think it was 1960s, so early 60s. These people didn't have ID. It wasn't like it is now. There's no internet. You can't track them down. And they all had aliases. They would get arrested and give a different name, and then they were vagabonds. They would take off like gypsies, It's hard to track somebody down if they don't have a permanent residence. That's what I think. It's really hard to get somebody on a parole violation if you don't know where they are.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I don't know.
You might be right. I mean, like I said, O'Neill takes a lot of leaps here, and the Smith thing is a little bit weird. Roger Smith got very close to the family, though. He actually adopted Mary Bruner's son at one point while she was in prison. Him and his wife adopted their son. He was close to the Manson family. He seemed to believe that there was some potential for them, but the author O'Neill says he's like a living and breathing Reeve Whitson. I still don't have a firm grasp on him, and I'm frankly shocked that I haven't heard from him about all this. And along with the free clinic of, what was it called? The Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, where a lot of the Manson girls eventually were treated for STDs and different medical ailments. Manson often went there, took the girls there for the free care. The founder, David Smith, was interviewed. Roger Smith claims, so there's two Smiths here. Roger Smith often met with the Manson family at the same clinic that David Smith founded. But there was research going on, amphetamine research projects going on to determine the effects of certain drugs, LSD, amphetamines, etc., on mice, rats, and the conspiracy theory is that they were using people like Manson and the family to see what would happen if you started injecting this into the people world and set these people free in a controlled, crowded environment such as Haight-Ashbury, and essentially see what would happen. That's the conspiracy theory, because eventually these people all became mass murderers. Days after the family was arrested for the Tate LaBianca murders, all the files pertaining to the clinic's amphetamine research project went missing, never to be seen again.
Interesting.
Related? It's interesting. Maybe, not necessarily related at all, but interesting for sure.
For sure. And with Tom too, it took him 30 years to write this book, give or take.
20 plus, yep.
20 plus years. And so that makes me think that there's a lot of credibility there, and he did his due diligence, but he's also grasping at a lot of straws there. He definitely has a view on what happened, and he has a view on Bugliosi, and I think he wanted to create his own ending. That's what I think. I don't know if you agree.
Well, so let's talk about his take on Bugliosi here. So as we said, we think the CIA connections are a bit of a stretch for sure. And we have about 5 minutes left here. So I'm going to try to go through the Bugliosi segments of the book. O'Neill said his goal was not necessarily to say what did happen, but it's to prove that the official story didn't. And I do think he does a very good job of poking certain holes in the official story. I'll read a little bit quicker here. In contrast, Chaos vibrates with staggering new insights, including the bombshell concerning the family-related Gary Hinman murder provided to O'Neill by one of the LA County Sheriff's Office most respected detectives, who bitterly remarks that Bugliosi made up the race war helter-skelter motive to sell books. Obviously it wasn't just to sell books, because he was prosecuting them at the same time, although the book was being written at the time of the trial by his co-writer. He adds, no one in law enforcement believed it. There has always been a catalog of credible counter-theories about the murders, one of the most persuasive arguing that Manson and company were pimping the girls and supplying narcotics to an orgiastic elite of Hollywood party animals. The entertainment industry naturally closed ranks and denied everything. This theory goes when a mundane drug burn triggered the slayings. So there's the drug theory again. In his essential 2011 update of the Manson file, Nicholas Schreck, the author, also suggested that an undercover FBI operation including Paramount Studios and the mob, implicating Paramount Studios and the mob in his super decadent Hollywood drug scene, was carefully occluded from the official record. Okay. Now, O'Neill suggests an even spookier scenario prevailed. Manson and the family were studied, infiltrated, and manipulated by those same forces who unleashed COINTELPRO, Operation Chaos, and MK Ultra. Now, Bugliosi was compromised, according to O'Neill. Before he ever even got the assignment to do the Tate LaBianca murders, the DA's office should have fired him, and he should have been disbarred when they found out about what he had done in the Milkman case in '68. What's the Milkman case? The Milkman case, again, from this book, there's not a whole lot else on it, although there is some. I found a 1972 article about it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. It wasn't much, though. It became public when Bugliosi was running for the LA district attorney in '72. Convinced that his wife, Gail, had been impregnated by their milkman, it emerged that he'd used his status and public resources to terrorize the innocent man and his family, including threats about their kids, creepy phone calls, and demands of paternity tests. An exasperated Gail, O'Neill writes, assured them that her esteemed husband had mental problems. When he ran again in '74, a much darker episode surfaced. Allegedly, now allegedly is important here. This is a man who has died, and it's important not to just assume or believe everything that's written. But Bugliosi had beaten his own pregnant mistress so badly that she miscarried, and he used his influence inside the criminal justice system to make the problem disappear. After that last heated interview with Bugliosi in 2006, where Bugliosi made all kinds of threats, claimed to not remember anything that O'Neill was talking about, O'Neill was unsurprised when an onslaught of verbose, defamatory letters arrived at the offices of his first publisher, which was Penguin. O'Neill finally, this is the end of my notes here, O'Neill finally says, I don't like to speculate, but some pretty serious researchers, and there are serious assassination researchers out there, are convinced that Bugliosi was, let's just say, obligated to certain federal agencies, or had been for his entire career, to write a book like Reclaiming History and to present a false narrative like he did for Helter Skelter.
Yes.
So that's pretty much it on Chaos. I think we've said mostly what we wanted to say about it. Leah, did I leave anything major out here that you can think of related to Chaos, or any of the theories that Chaos delves into?
No. I think it is important to note that, again, we are not saying that Manson isn't guilty. We are not saying anything like that. And I think there's an argument to be made that Bugliosi did what he did. He did a bad thing for good reasons. I think that at least that's how he felt. If he was suborning perjury, he was only doing it to ensure a guilty verdict for Manson. Because at this point, nobody who had there was no conspiracy to commit murder in 1969.
Right, and he knew that the only way he could get Manson was to implicate him in a conspiracy. The easiest way to do that was this helter-skelter theory that Manson, by convincing the girls that this world event was going to happen and these events would set it into motion, he was complicit in the events. If the Beausoleil theory is to be believed, Manson may have wanted something to happen, but he never directly ordered anybody to do anything, and it was never about a race war. Therefore, what these people did on their own and the murders they committed would not have implicated necessarily Charlie Manson in conspiracy, and Manson may have never been tried and convicted of these crimes and may have been a free man after all this. I assume he would have done something to get locked up eventually. One real quick before we cut off here, I believe that Bugliosi was maybe partially a bastard. I believe he was an egotist. He was probably a bit of an elitist. He was also a pit bull. He was one of those junkyard dog lawyers, got down and dirty, was not afraid of being petty, was not afraid of fighting dirty. But I do not believe that he was a CIA asset that was just basically a puppet of the government. I think he did what he felt he had to do to get the right man behind bars, even if to get the right man behind bars, you had to do some of the wrong things. That's really what I think the story of Bugliosi boils down to. And he still had a very impressive career. You should check him out, learn about him, and then develop your own opinion. With that, though, we're going to break here and be back with the story of the Beausoleil copycat theory and lots of Papa, and then we're going to hear some really intense Manson interview sound bites. And then in our third segment, we're going to do a group discussion here. We're going to loop Jeff and Mounts back in to get the final takes on Manson and the theories around it. So don't you go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Volume 2 of Episode 3 of the Unholy Trinity of Cults, the Manson Family. And we are here to discuss the Bobby Beausoleil copycat murders theory, which a lot of people believe. There's been a lot of favor gained around these theories in the last couple of years. There was a film that Rob Zombie was associated, I believe it was Manson in His Own Words, which really went deep into this theory about there never really being anything much about Helter Skelter, even though it was what Manson absolutely preached. He talked a lot of shit about Helter Skelter on that ranch. There seems to be no denying that. But as far as Helter Skelter being the direct motive, here is the alternate theory. And this even came up in the trial and was quickly dismissed. The girls actually claimed that these were copycat murders at one point, and that theory was largely dismissed and said they couldn't get Manson off with that. But here's what we believe happened. Let's just talk a little bit about this Beausoleil thing. You'll remember from the last episode we talked about Bobby Beausoleil being the murderer, the person that stabbed musician Gary Hinman in his apartment after a failed bid to get money from him. And Charles Manson was directly involved. So let's talk just a little bit about this. This all comes from charlesmanson.com. Okay, if you'd like to see the source of this, that's where I got these notes anyway. The possible motive for the Charles Manson murders. On August 6, 1969, Robert Beausoleil, a heavily involved member of the Manson family, that's heavily involved, I guess, if you look at this situation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he was kind of a hanger-on and an associate. But Manson seemed to have an affection for Beausoleil, which you'll hear when we... What's that?
I don't think he had an affection for Bobby. I think they were convenient for each other.
That could have been very well it. And maybe that's as affectionate as Manson got with people, was the people that could do the most and that reminded him of him in some way. Those were the people he liked the best.
Yep.
But he was sleeping in the backseat of a Volkswagen on the side of the road in front of 946 Old Topanga Canyon Road in Topanga, California. When a California Highway Patrol squad car approached the vehicle, the officer stopped and inspected the vehicle, observing Beausoleil, who was then woken up and explained that the car was broken down the evening prior. When the officer ran the vehicle's registration, he discovered that the vehicle was stolen and wanted by LA police for fingerprinting, as it reportedly belonged to a man that was murdered in the LA area. Beausoleil was immediately taken into custody, questioned, and jailed for his possible involvement in the murder of the vehicle's owner, Gary Hinman. The Hinman murder involved the victim being held hostage in his home for the entire weekend of July 25th, 1969, until finally on Sunday evening, after signing over the pink slips to two of his vehicles, a Volkswagen and a Fiat, Beausoleil stabbed Hinman twice in the heart. While Susan Atkins allegedly held Hinman still. Prior to leaving, Beausoleil staged the scene with bizarre writings on the wall written in the victim's blood, political piggy. Although Beausoleil was last to leave, the entire incident involved at least 5 Manson family members, who were Atkins, as I just mentioned. Mary Bruner, the first Manson girl, was also there. Beausoleil, of course. Charles Manson, who showed up long enough to slice Hinman's ear off and slice him across the face. And Bruce Davis, who was fathered Zezazo Zadfrak-Glutz with Susan Atkins.
I love it.
Inside the Hinman home, as I mentioned, police found Gary Hinman's body, and on the wall, printed in his blood, were the words "political piggy" and a bloody paw print. Apparently, Beausoleil believed that this would tie the crime to the Black Panther movement, an African-American revolutionary group who were active at the time in L.A. Now, these writings on the wall, the first writing on the wall is intriguing to me, Leah, because obviously if political piggy was done here on the wall, it makes sense why you would write helter skelter and pig in the other scenes if they were copycat murders. My question is, why the hell was it done here if this wasn't in some way part of helter skelter, or thought to be part of helter skelter? Why would political piggy be written on the wall? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. And it does go, I'm going to bring up Lots of Papa now. Before this, a few weeks before this, Tex Watson had gotten into a drug deal. And the dealer's name was Lots of Papa. His real name is Bernard Crow. It's his real name.
Right. Manson, when he eventually admitted to the crime, says, "Yeah, I shot the crow."
Yes. And he was a black man and a drug dealer. And Tex Watson had ripped him off. So he owed Tex a lot of money. Tex owed him a lot of money, and Lots of Papa knew Tex Watson as Charles. That's how he knew him, which is his real first name.
That's right.
So Lots of Papa calls the ranch and says, I want to talk to Charlie, tell him to meet me at da-da-da place and bring me my money, or I'm going to kill his girlfriend. He had kidnapped Tex's girlfriend. So
held her hostage as collateral.
He did.
Until Watson came back with his drugs or his money.
Right. And in the midst of this, Watson was not there. It was Charles Manson who got the call. He did not know what was going on, but he went on the call. He was, pissed off and psychotic. He took a gun with him, and he got there and shot Lots of Papa.
In fact, I believe, didn't Lots of Papa actually challenge him to do it, stood right up against the gun and said, "Do it, shoot me," thinking that he might be able to psych Manson out, which was not to be the case.
Well, Manson, keep in mind, too, what we didn't cover, if you don't know about Charles Manson, Charles Manson is a little under 5 foot nothing. He is very tiny and scrawny.
5'3" or 5'6", depending on who you believe.
Right, but very tiny. He's a little man. He's not very intimidating. So, and Lots of Papa is a very big, kind of an opposing figure.
Look like a big bear.
Big bear. And he shot him in the stomach. And Charles Manson thought that Lots of Papa had died, because the next day, or a couple days later, it was in the news that a black man that was part of the Black Panthers, his body was found. Manson assumed that was him, and he was terrified that the Black Panthers were coming for him. He got paranoid, which is how the straight Satans ended up there. That's why he wanted the protection. So when Bobby Beausoleil is trying to deal with Hinman, he got away at one point. There was a struggle. Mary Bruner calls again, Spahn Ranch. Charlie comes out, cuts off part of Hinman's ear. And then again, there was another day. Bobby left him alive. And when he talked to Charlie, he said, "What am I going to do?" And he said, "You know what you have to do."
Right.
And he ended up killing him and writing this stuff on the wall. When he did do it on the wall, it said pig. And I personally think Susan Atkins was the one who did it, because if you look at the two pigs, they're almost identical.
And Beausoleil also claims to have not remembered doing it.
Right. So I definitely think it was Sexy Sadie.
And you're right, Leah. The Lotsapapa incident happened in early July. The Beausoleil-Hinman incident happened in late July. So what you're saying could very well be true, that at that point they were already trying to blame shit, make it look like the Black Panthers had done something.
Yes. And even the difference between Peggy at the Tate crime scene and at the Hinman crime scene, there's an actual paw print next to where it says pig.
Right.
And it actually worked at first. They immediately thought that this was a drug deal gone bad with the Black Panthers. Originally, that's what they thought. But Beausoleil was dumb and drove around in a stolen car with a weapon in it.
Well, we had mentioned that last week,
right.
that Beausoleil took one of the cars that he had stolen from him and forced him to hand over the pink slip for, and then drove away with it as a getaway car. So one of the all-time bonehead moves there. But it's funny because I had read that Charles Manson continued to think that Lotsapapa was dead until the trial, when he showed up as a witness.
He had no idea. According to legend, he thought he was dead. He really believed that he had killed this guy, and then he walks in and he's like, "Oh fuck! Like, how's he alive?" He was shocked.
Can you imagine? Okay, just think about this for a second. If Bernard Crowe Lotsapapa had never been shot, and this Hinman accident got out of control, would Charlie Manson have been in the state of mind he was to come in and slice Hinman's face, which was part of what made that whole thing go out of control? But maybe that was what Manson meant to do. He probably meant to cover his own ass at that point and not really care who else he involved, although he may have cared in his own weird way. But yeah, can you imagine if that had never happened? It's possible that he would not have been in the state of mind he was at the time of the Hinman murder. Hinman may not have died, and therefore we would have never had a Tate LaBianca murder spree and all those victims if things had potentially gone different with the Lotsapapa situation and then the Hinman situation. Have you ever thought about just the killing of Crowe alone? Had that not happened, all of this may not have happened.
I absolutely believe that. I am 110% under the belief that if Lotsapapa didn't happen, Hinman definitely wouldn't have happened, at least not the way that it did. And I also think had Bobby Beausoleil not taken that car, or at least got caught in it, I don't believe that Tate and LaBianca would have happened, because I'm under the belief that, yes, they were trying to get Bobby out of prison, but also because when Susan Atkins did confess to Virginia Graham and Ronnie Howard, she was being held on the Hinman murder. That's why she was still in prison.
Right.
So if that hadn't happened, they wouldn't have gotten caught. If Bobby didn't, I think they would have gotten away with it if Bobby wasn't caught in that car. I do. I don't think they ever would have been convicted.
I think Beausoleil probably would have talked at some point. I don't know, though. I don't know, because he himself said that he would rather stay in prison. He's been in prison ever since. All of them that were involved here never left prison, except for Van Houten for a brief period, as we mentioned last week. But it's possible that Beausoleil said he would rather stay the rest of his life in prison than admit that Bugliosi's helter-skelter theory was true. Because, A, that implicates Beausoleil as a white supremacist, which he may not have wanted to be associated with. I don't know.
Well, it was rumored that he was part of the Aryan Nation in prison. He claims that's not true, but there are a lot of people that were in prison with him that said that he was.
And either way, right. So either way, Beausoleil has said helter-skelter, the theory didn't happen. Bugliosi prosecuted as though Hinman was the first of the helter-skelter murders that were at least found out about. The second and the third being Tate the Tate residence and then the LaBianca residence, and then they were literally trying to start this race war. What it seems like was that a lot of bad shit happened all at the same time. Manson got involved with the Watson drug deal gone bad, shot lots of Papa. Now he thinks the Black Panthers are after him. Now he's got to do something to make it look like the Black Panthers are murdering associates to cover his ass, and hopefully, I would assume, think that Manson wanted it to seem like the Black Panthers were out there killing people that had done them wrong, including Hinman, including lots of Papa. And that Manson wasn't involved in any of it because he was trying to save his own ass. And at that point, when Beausoleil gets picked up for it because he was a dumbass, at that point, Charlie's trying to help Beausoleil to get out of prison, so he does these copycat murders at Tate LaBianca. Now, Manson's claim is that he didn't know how far it would go once Tex and the girls got there, and that might be true. I don't know. But I think the larger question, well, before we go into that, let's hear from Susan Atkins on this. Susan Atkins stated, instantly the atmosphere at Spawns tightened even more. This is right after Hinman. We figured it would be only hours before the police came down on us. But additionally, we all were affected by Charlie's obsession with getting Bobby out of jail. Bobby had been driven by a need to prove himself as tough as Charlie, and now Charlie was possessed with the need to prove his loyalty to his brother, to die for him if necessary. Out of all the confusion and the mass of words, the constant use of drugs came a vague sort of scheme to try to convince the police that Bobby could not have done the Hinman killing because he was in prison when the copycat murders took place. So that was what Susan Atkins said about it. But with all that in mind, I think it's important to point out Catherine Scher, Paul Watkins, many others have indicated that this rap about Helter Skelter, this worldview that Manson was preaching to the girls while they were on acid, while they were being conditioned for weeks and weeks and weeks, endless playing of the White Album, endless recitation of Revelation 9, endless acid trips, orgies, control, all this shit was happening, and it was in the middle of the powder keg of 1968, 69, 70 period, where there was tons of racial conflict in the streets. And you could imagine that these girls who eventually went out to do the killings, the copycat murders, if this Beausoleil theory is to be believed, they had Helter Skelter running through their brains, right? So, like, I don't think Susan Atkins, Leslie Van Houten, these people believe what Charlie Manson said. So if Charlie Manson was preaching Helter Skelter nonstop on that ranch, whether Manson ever believed it himself, which he claims that wasn't his trip, that was the DA's trip. But if Manson didn't believe it, he certainly preached it. And if he preached it, isn't he still complicit in conspiracy with the girls, even if the girls thought they were doing, regardless of what the girls thought, and even if the copycat murders were the actual motive, if any of those girls thought they were out there starting a race war and they were trying to be as violent as possible and writing those things on the wall, if any of them believed that was about Helter Skelter, then Manson is still complicit as a conspirator.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Again, I don't, but I do think it might be harder to get that past a jury. It doesn't, right. In my opinion, yes, but it would have been harder to get past a jury, especially because Leslie Van Houten was part of it, and she was one of Bobby's girlfriends. That's how she ended up on the ranch, was because so it's easy to believe that, and Mary Bruner and all of that. Like, so I don't think it changes Manson's guilt, but it would have been harder. I do.
Well, Manson claims, as you'll hear in these interviews, Manson basically claims, I told him to go take care of it. I didn't tell him how to do it or what to do or who to do it to. I just told him to go take care of it. So I didn't conspire about anything. Manson knows the law to a degree. He did not want to be associated with a conspiracy. So this is the story that he told. But if you're to believe that Watson, Krenwinkel, Van Houten, Atkins, Kasabian, all of them that were out there participating in these murders, if you're to believe that none of them had Helter Skelter on their mind, then maybe Manson in these particular murders is not guilty of conspiracy and therefore should not have been tried for his life. But I believe it was Gary Fleischman, who was one of the attorneys at one point for Linda Kasabian, said that he personally believed Manson had a legal injustice done to him in this case. However, he still deserved to be in prison. So make of that what you will. But in the so we have about 10 minutes left in this segment. So Leah, do you have anything else to talk about as it relates to Lhasa Papa, Beausoleil, the motives for the murders, anything that we haven't really touched? Because this went a little bit quicker than I had thought since we talked so much about it last week. But anything else you want to add here before we start listening to some of these clips?
The only thing I would add, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the motive, but there is another murder that I actually am not positive if Manson was, if they've ever fully tied him to it, but a ranch hand at Spawn named Shorty Shea was found dead. They did not find his body until 1976 or 77, I believe.
He was chopped, he was dismembered and buried, right?
Yes, he was. And I believe, I forget where they found him, but it was actually interesting enough. Where they found him was very close to where Leslie Van Houten's attorney was found.
Oh, yes. That was Ronald Hughes, the hippie lawyer.
Yes.
Was found buried between two boulders during the trial. Some believe was killed by the Manson family.
And I believe that too. And Shorty Shea, they definitely killed. And it was because apparently he had heard them talking about Susan Atkins, run your mouth, as always, said something in front of him about the Beausoleil murder. So he was murdered by Tex and Charlie and Sadie for that reason.
I believe Charlie Manson also believed that Shea tipped off the cops to the details that led to their arrest for the auto theft ring.
Dune buggies, yes.
Right, which they were using the stolen cars to create these dune buggies that they could, have souped up vehicles to outrun the cops in the middle of Death Valley as they made their way to the bottomless pit when the race war started, according to Helter Skelter. Either way, they had dune buggies out there, and they were, for some reason, whether it was just to drive around in the desert, who knows? Maybe Manson didn't even know what the hell he was doing at that point. He still was making it up as he went along.
Yeah, he absolutely was, without a doubt. He's a con man. That's all he ever was.
I think I tend to believe that's right. That at some point you just are like, I don't know what else to do with this whole trip. I'm preaching this to him. Now I'm having him go out there and kill for me. I don't really know where to take this. So, I don't know. He might have been making it up, pulling it out of his ass as they went along. Either way, I think we have talked enough about this, Leah. Let's hear from Charles Manson himself.
Let's do it.
This comes from a 1993 interview with Diane Sawyer. At the same time, and we don't have time to go into all of this clip-wise, but Leslie, go ahead.
Is this the clip where he says, if you don't do it, I'll get on it? It's one of my favorite Manson clips. I love that clip. It's creepy.
It is creepy, and it's pretty crazy. And at the same time that Diane Sawyer was doing these interviews with him, she was also conducting interviews with Leslie Van Houten and Patricia Krenwinkel behind bars. And she had talked to them about Manson, about the killings. By that point, they were both incredibly, remorseful about what had happened. And they were not fans of Manson anymore. So that's referenced a little bit in these clips as well. But let's get to it here. I'm going to actually share this with you guys as part of the program here. And I got to admit, Manson is sort of like this crazy performer who is so fascinating, but at the same time, he's crazy and he's evil at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's why I'm so obsessed with it. It's fascinating. It really is.
It really is. So just give me 1 second here, and I will get us started on this clip. All right, so without further ado, here is the clip of Charles Manson on Diane Sawyer. Guys, let me know if you can't hear this clearly, but here it is in this first segment. We'll just listen.
So now, wait a minute. Criminal behavior's the same. It's mundane in most minds. Criminal will always go to a familiar place. Tex had been to that house. Tex went back to that house. Here's the conversation. Indian Mesa. We got 4 campfires. We got 4 queens on a motorcycle gang, a motorcycle group that rides SS motorcycles out of Venice, Santa Monica. So we're riding motorcycles and we're all up there and we got these fires going. We got this big problem that came up. I had to go shoot somebody for Tex. Bobby's in the prison. My brother's in jail. Now, Understand my mind. All my life I've been in jail because I didn't have no one to get me out of jail. I didn't have no brother outside. So I spent years and years and years and years just because nobody would come and sign their name and get me out of jail. And the jail couldn't let me out because I didn't have no place to go. So I spent 22 years in prison because I didn't have nobody outside. I can't let somebody that's with me stay in jail. It just, it's not in my makeup, man. I got to get my brother out of jail.
So you needed money to do that.
Well, here's the division between your mind and my mind. Here's where the chamber opens up. When you get in trouble, you go to your mother. You call up mother. I ain't got no mother to call. When you go to the bank, draw some money, pay a lawyer. I ain't got no money. I can't go to no lawyer. I go to a lawyer, I ain't got enough money. I got a little money. And anytime anybody knows anything about lawyers, when you got a little money, they're just taking that. They'll take the little money unless you sue them in court. You dig? In other words, like, I don't have enough money to go to the lawyer to get Bobby out. So everybody's standing around. And I said, pay me what you owe me now. And they said, well, how do we do that? I said, get my brother out of jail. He said, how do we do it? I said, I don't know how you do it. I don't care how you do it. Do it now. Do it. And they said, how do we do it? I said, don't ask me how to do it. I don't want to be no part of no conspiracy. But however you do it and get it done now. And they said, well, we don't know what to do. We'll get a lawyer. And then here, Leslie and Patty, they said, if we get a lawyer, all they're going to do is lie and take our money anyway. Now, system, blame it on your lawyers. If your lawyers ain't lying and taking the money of the poor people, then the poor people got a court to stand on, and they got rights as individuals for a revolution they fought in 1776 that guarantees rights to a common, ordinary farmer, poor man on the street like me, a rebel. I got my rights in the 76 courtroom. If you don't give me my rights in the courtroom, then I become your King George. And I got all the rights then. And when I stand on the mountain and I say, do it, it gets done. If it don't get done, then I'll move on it. And that's the last thing in the world you want me to do, because I got that Confederate sword in the kitchen. Don't invoke me. Do it. Get it done. How do we do it? I don't know. I don't want to be involved in it. I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. In Japan, they call it ninja. I don't get involved in violence. I'm not a violent human being.
Yes, you are.
Did you tell the women to do their witchy things?
I said, if you want to do something, leave something witchy.
His face here.
Just like I would tell you, if you're going to do something, do it well. And leave something witchy. Leave a sign to let the world know that you were there.
All right, so we'll pause it there real quick. Charles Manson looks like an absolute wild man in this video with Diane Sawyer. It still has the burned swastika on his forehead between his eyes.
It's actually tattooed now. By that point, by the 90s, he had it inked in.
He had it inked in, okay. Just, I don't know. So in spite of all the theatrics here, he clearly states, I was not part of any conspiracy. I told them what they needed to do, and they needed to figure it out, get my brother out of jail, and they did what they wanted to do. Now, in the second clip we're going to listen to, first of all, do you have any thoughts on that particular clip? Obviously, you know that one well, Leah.
I do. This was the interview I watched when I was 13 that turned me on to the Manson cult.
Oh, okay. This was the one. All right.
This was the one. There's so much in this. If just for the listeners, if you haven't seen it, you need to watch the Diane Sawyer interview with Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Manson, and Squeaky Fromm are all in this. Susan Atkins turned it down at the time. It is fascinating to watch. It is so good. And for me here in this clip, Manson implicates himself. Like, he totally incompletes himself, because he says, I said we have to get my brother out of jail. I don't want to know what you're doing, but go do it. And then he even admits to leave something witchy there. Like, at this point, he knows he's not getting out. And another important thing really quickly about Charles Manson that you need to know, and I think this sums him up great, and we missed it last week, when Manson was up for parole, when he had finally finished his sentence in 1967, he had gone in front of the parole board and actually begged them not to let him go. because he didn't know how to live life outside of prison.
He said he was a 10-year-old boy on the outside.
Yes. And it's absolutely true. And then when the convictions fell through or went through, when they were convicted, Manson and Bugliosi looked at Manson and said, he said, or Manson said to Bugliosi something along the lines of, "You're sending me home. This isn't a punishment for me. You're just sending me home." And Bugliosi said, "Well, I don't think you've ever met old Sparky."
Right. So it wasn't quite the home he had remembered.
Right.
It was going to be a lot more electrifying.
Exactly. And Manson, in that moment, it was the first time that Bugliosi said, like, he actually saw him have fear. And then, 2 years later, they overturned the death penalty, converting all of their sentences to life.
Right.
And truly, I don't believe that Manson wanted out of prison.
Well, but Bugliosi actually commented, I guess it would have been the gas chamber, not the electric chair.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was the gas chamber. Yeah.
But still, the point is the same. And I think part of that is right. I think Manson felt very comfortable in prison, although I believed that in some ways he may have wanted to get out for various reasons. But Bugliosi actually says, in a way, Manson beat the rap.
Yeah, he did.
Because he got to go home to the place that he knew the best. Real quick, so you mentioned Van Houten and Krenwinkel interviewed for this 1993 piece. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. That was the date. And here he talks a little bit about the girls. He says they stabbed for a cause. And here's what Manson has to say about that cause and about how he feels about the girls and what they're saying now. So that's the last part we'll play here before we round out this segment and then have our open discussion about Manson. So here it is. Leah, did you have anything else on that first part before we move on?
Nope, go for it.
All right, here we go.
Doing with all those women, and you think that's what I would be doing with all those women because that's what you need to think. Now, you've spent all this time over there in that women's prison listening to all the particulars of what women do in and out of criminology and crime. Judges in robes. Have I ever lied to you about anything? Have I ever lied about anyone to anybody about anything? Is there any time in all the time you've known me, have I ever told you anything that wasn't right or true?
What's the first word that comes to mind when you think of those two women?
Leslie don't know me. Leslie was only at that ranch a couple minutes.
But today?
Oh, not true.
I'm surprised. Patty has picked up a lot of suffering. Now, here's the thing. You stand for a cause, and that cause begins to crumble. And you crumble with the cause because you don't have to hold on. You don't have nothing to hold on. You fall up underneath everybody else's opinion. And you're turned around by what they think because you're looking back on society, and she's not been in jail long enough to know that society that she's thinking about is not the society that's really going on. The society 25 years ago that she has in her mind is gone. That society moved on. There's another back window on this trip.
So the word for them?
Word?
Yeah, what are they? Give me a word.
You are your faith. Lose it, and you're not.
He speaks in riddles, and he thinks he's so clever.
Right?
It's true.
Yeah. If they lost faith in what they did, that's on them. I didn't lose faith.
All right.
Implicating himself. I didn't lose faith. And about Leslie Van Houten, I don't believe him a bit. It is true that she was only there for about a year. It wasn't as long as Patricia Krenwinkel, who was the third follower. However, Leslie Van Houten used to follow him around daily. She was kind of like his personal assistant, and he would make her read the Bible to him, especially when he was in the bathtub. But he would also make her his mirror. So he would move his hands or make faces. If of all the women besides Squeaky, I believe that Leslie Van Houten actually knew him the best. And they didn't have a sexual relationship. They had sex, but it wasn't a romantic relationship in any way. I think Leslie probably knows Manson better than most of the followers, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's very dubious what he said about Leslie hardly knowing him. I think that I agree with you that that's dubious. Although he does seem to have had an additional or more intense affection for. He said, "Patty surprises me."
Yeah,
So I think he thought she was a true believer and was always going to remain that way. And remember, Manson has true believers. Sandra Good is a true believer. Squeaky Fromme is a true believer.
I believe that Pat Krenwinkel and definitely Susan Atkins were still true believers.
You think Atkins was even at the end?
Yeah, I do not buy, I don't know if we talked about it, but she became, her and Tex Watson also. My mom used to always say, if you're looking for Jesus, go to a prison, because everybody finds him there. And this is another example of that. Susan Atkins and Tex Watson both became born-again Christians. I don't buy any of it. It was all just to get out of prison. Susan Atkins is a true monster. Bugliosi called her the vampirist. She's a horrible person. And I think Pat Krenwinkel too. I really, really do. I think a lot of her sudden change, I don't really buy it. I don't. I don't think she's a deep follower. And if she weren't in prison, if she hadn't been there for the murders, I think she would have ended up like Squeaky and Lynette. She would still be a follower of Manson. Do you agree?
Yeah. I tend to agree. If her brain hadn't been completely melted by acid at some point, if she continued to use, she might have just been a raving lunatic in the woods if she kept going the way she was. But no, I tend to believe it. If she remained lucid, I do believe she probably would have remained faithful. But with that, we will come back for an abbreviated segment in segment number 3, where we're going to bring in Mounts and Jeff and get some final thoughts all across the board on Manson, what you've heard the last 2 episodes, what your thoughts are, and any other additional things we want to talk about with Charles Manson. And then Leah, we're going to have to do this in post-production, but has provided me some interesting clips. So when we edit this puppy together, I think we're going to play some Manson over top of our exit here, if time permits. So we will be right back with thoughts on Manson, and then hopefully some interesting audio to round things out. And we'll see you in just a moment. Welcome back. The final segment of Volume 2 of Episode 3 of the Unholy Trinity of Cults. We have made this as confusing as possible. But Leah, I'm proud of this series that we've done. You and I have gone on a long, strange trip together, visiting the scenes of Waco, Texas, and the Branch Davidians. We went into the deep, dark South American jungle and talked about the horrors of Jonestown, and we've wound up here all helter-skelter talking about the Manson family. What a series. Yeah. What a series this has been. What are your thoughts? I'm more interested in your thoughts on the series as a whole, and then I want to go to these other gents for Manson specifically. But what are your thoughts on the series as a whole and then Manson as a whole?
So I think I'm biased, full disclosure, but I am really proud of these episodes. I think they're some of the best we've done, but I'm also, I found them entertaining listening back to them. I actually really liked the episodes as a whole, and it was fun to do. I never had so much fun doing research for the show.
Yeah, me too.
As far as the Manson family as a whole, I don't think I can sum it up. Like, I don't know that I can even express my feelings about, because it's all just so crazy to me. It's the whole story, the way Hollywood is put in there. And, you know, Quentin Tarantino did that movie recently, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I haven't seen yet.
I won't say it, but let's just say Tarantino's version of events is completely different than the version of events you know.
So I caught a little. From what I understand, the tables get flipped on the Manson family. And okay, I'm very excited to see that. I think that would be great.
It's a well-done film. I was disappointed because I wanted Tarantino to go in a much darker direction and actually do Manson for real, but he went a different direction. It's a very well-made film. It did very well. So it's a matter of opinion. Yeah,
but as Greg said in the beginning, if you have the opportunity and you're interested in this, definitely watch the 1976 film Helter Skelter, based off Bugliosi's book. It's a 2-part movie. It goes really in depth in it, and you kind of get an idea of what really happened.
And if any of you can find out how to get a good copy of that film, let me know, because I've had a hell of a time. I tried to pick one up for this, and it's damn hard to get these days.
It's really hard to get. It's not on YouTube anymore. There's clips, but the whole thing isn't on there. And as a whole, I think as far as the murders go, I'm going to say that I really, truly believe in the Bobby Beausoleil motive. I do believe that was the motive, and it did all spur from the shooting of Lots of Papa. This had nothing to do with a race war, nothing. And I think those girls were so strung out on LSD that it took them years to get it out of their system. We mentioned last week that Leslie Van Houten was worried people were going to see her wings as they were popping through. She could feel the buds on her back. That's how crazy these people were. Sandra Good, who we did talk about briefly, there's a clip of her from a 1973 documentary called Manson, where she says during the trials that it was Bobby. She says that during the trials. Her exact words are, the motive was love of brother. That's why they committed love of brother. So and other than that,
I do tend to agree with you that the motive for these killings was most likely all around covering Mance's ass and getting Beausoleil out of prison. But I absolutely believed he preached helter skelter nonstop to these people, and I absolutely believe many of the Manson followers and many of the killers, at least to some degree, believed in helter skelter and thought that's what all of this was a part of. So whether Manson got 100% fair legal treatment or not, I think he is where he belongs.
Agreed. He's dead now, so he is where he actually belongs.
Maybe he's hot under the collar these days. Who knows if you believe that kind of thing. Mounts, you had just recently listened to the first episode of Manson. After hearing the material we've gone through on this one, what are your overall thoughts on Manson?
Prior to us doing this episode, the most in-depth I got with Manson was that TV show Mindhunters, which was amazing. And I guess without hindsight, it would be easy to believe any one of the conspiracies, thinking the government would be behind it. But knowing through these interviews that you played, I didn't know any of that, anything really, and that makes the most sense to what the theory that you posted at the end there.
You're talking about the copycat theories?
Copycat, yeah, they were trying to get his friend out of jail and doing that. But yeah, that was very eye-opening. And being that I wasn't around, it was great to listen to that first episode and enlightening. So yeah, but yeah, he definitely was where he belonged, and now he is definitely where he belongs. Like you said.
So. All right. Well, and Mr. Berg, now you have had to sit here as a captive audience through this whole cult series. This is not Jeff's cup of tea, but he was patient enough to sit here while Leah and I went through all these facts, figures, clips, and whatnot. Jeff, what are your overall thoughts on the Manson story?
Well, I do actually have a couple. Well, first of all, Charles Manson, just in general, is a fascinating psychological case study for anybody. His followers are right up there. But I have a few things to say here. Okay. Charles Manson is a salesman. And salesmen are dangerous. At their least dangerous, they're like myself. You came to visit me at Sundance, and I convinced you to spend your last $15,000 on fake vacations. At their worst, they are convincing you to go out and murder people. Mm-hmm. So my advice would be, if somebody is trying to convince you to do something that they're not willing to do themselves, i.e., I never purchased the Sundance product because it sucked, then you might want to think twice about following that person. The other thing I'll say is what's truly scary about this is all of the tactics and even the results in some way that you saw with the Manson family are happening right now. I think I've said this before, where these are tactics used to recruit terrorists.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
It also reminds me very much of the Trump cult. Mm-hmm. again, a salesman who is not willing to do anything or take any sort of responsibility for things that he's done, convinced a bunch of people based on a whole lot of lies to follow him and believe every word he said without any proof or any sort of validity behind his statements. And it happened so quickly. And I think, like, the scary part is people want this.
Yeah.
There's a large group of people that want to be led by a charlatan like
or
Manson.
Want something to believe. They really want to believe in something.
Yeah. And then the final thing I will say, and this will tease maybe an episode down the line, Abby, I know you're listening.
Mm-hmm.
This will be a tick in my box as to why religion is one of the worst things on the planet.
I couldn't agree with you more. I could not agree with you more there.
And
she's going to want to be on that episode with you, sir.
Well, we've talked about it.
We've talked about a tag team face-off.
Yeah, and I'm not moderating that one. I'm on Team Jeff. I want to be part of that one.
All right.
It's this is not to say that the casual churchgoer would fall victim to a cult, but religion and religious people looking for something to believe in based on faith, are the easiest fooled human beings out there. And horrible human beings, evil human beings like Charles Manson purposely target those type of people because they can take the religion and they can form it into whatever they want and say, God is telling me to tell you this, and you have faith, obviously you need to follow me. And that's exactly what we've seen with all the cults that we covered. But just look into smaller, lesser known cults. Again, it's like they leverage religion to convince people to do things that are anti-religious.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, what do you think about this? You said people that need something to believe in get taken for a ride by these charlatans. Sometimes the charlatans will use religion, sometimes they'll use other means, but people looking for something to believe in. I think what makes cult leaders so evil is that they take what seems to be a basic human need for something to believe in. Most humans have this strong desire. You could call it a need. And wouldn't it be the same thing as somebody, taking your need for food or your need for nourishment and feeding you something that was laced with poison? Isn't that the same thing when someone who is looking for something to believe in is then fed a bitter pill by these charlatans, which is actually the big dream, the thing for them to believe in, but it's laced with poison? Isn't that so often the case with these cult leaders?
Yes.
That makes me think that's the most evil part about them, that they prey on the need.
Yes. I mean, but when you think about food, like, you need food to live. You don't need religion to live.
It's not quite the same level of need, but it's still the same.
I get your premise. I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what do you think? Do you think that there was any validity to the prosecution's helter-skelter motive, or do you think this was all about covering Manson's ass and getting Beausoleil out of jail?
Well, anytime you have a case this high profile and celebrities involved, you're always going to get one side saying that he didn't get a fair trial, and the other side saying, this isn't even the half of it. I tend to believe, I tend to, in everything in my life, I like to listen, and I enjoy the conspiracy theory behind certain stories, but there's just too much evidence showing that the Helter Skelter story is the one,
Mm-hmm.
It just is. There's just too much. That doesn't mean that the more minor or lesser known stories or conspiracies behind it didn't happen in some way, shape, or form. It just means that.
But you believe they might have been like lucky byproducts or bonuses for Manson in the carrying out of this larger race war idea.
You're correct. The Charles Manson was selling a pitch from beginning to end. Like, that's what he was doing, and part of that pitch was to get people super fucked up on LSD, mm-hmm. and pitch them this idea that the Beatles were fucking talking to him.
Yeah, that's true.
And the only way that was going to work is if he accomplished the other part. Is like, take this LSD. Let's make this really fun, and then I'm going to pitch you the shit.
You want to hear something really creepy that I thought of last night? Maybe not creepy, just a weird factoid. After all this had happened, the Beatles obviously got asked questions about it, and John Lennon was very dismissive of the whole thing. He said, "Yeah, that Paul's song about a slide and one of George's songs about pigs, and that whole Manson thing was rubbish." Kind of, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he dismissed it. But think about it. here was the power of Charles Manson, or at least Charles Manson's actions, that at the end of all this, people, when they hear that he wanted the Beatles to come down to the desert and live with the family, and that like there was any way in hell that would ever happen. Of course there wasn't. But in the end, in this world, while Charles Manson was still alive, his name came out of the mouths of the Beatles.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that for a second.
Well, don't you think, like, it's obvious, like Charles Manson, he wanted to be a singer-songwriter, right? He wanted to be famous. And I think deep down he knew he didn't have the chops to be famous. Like for being a singer or songwriter, like the Beatles, like, so I think
he believed his music was beyond commercial appeal anyway.
Right. So he thought, okay, so go the other way. He thought he was too good for, the commercial appeal, and that people didn't understand it. And that's why he would never be famous for his music. I think he knew very early on that he was going to take this route, and he accomplished what he set out to do, which was to be famous.
I was considering for a brief period playing, instead of our theme song, playing Look at Your Game Girl, which is the most famous of the Manson compositions. I decided against it because I don't want to. I think we've done enough to sort of give you a little bit of the sizzle and the glitz and the glamour around Manson, and which sort of has raised him up to something that kids find a little darkly cool, right? And I've decided I really didn't want to play Manson's music on this episode to offer him more, positive praise. However, if you look at his music, they were decent tunes, but I don't know, Leah, you could tell me, was it anything on the level of the Beatles? I don't think so.
No, I mean, it's not on the level of the Beatles, but I gotta say, both Look at Your Game Girl and Cease to Exist, I really like those songs. And Cease to Exist, which is the one that the Beach Boys took and changed to Never Learn Not to Love.
Right.
I am actually a really big fan of that song, and the lyrics are so beautiful and so sexy. And also with Look at Your Game Girl, every time a new girl would come to potentially join the family, Charles Manson would sing that song to her every single time with every girl, and it worked every single time. And I would get that. Like, I think.
So there you go, Jeff. That was his favorite pitch.
Yeah, that was totally his pitch. And it
worked.
Yeah, it did work. And I think that he had talent. I do. But I think he's such a narcissistic sociopath that he could never be famous, because he wouldn't be able to take constructive criticism, or he didn't know how to do, like, he could have been very talented.
Dennis Wilson tried to minimize it and say, Charlie, this is the game. Like, this is how it's done. And Manson would not hear of it. He had felt betrayed.
Yeah, he did feel betrayed. And he really did think that he was that. I mean, if you listen to you can go on YouTube and hear the Manson recordings. He has the girls in the background, and sometimes it is just horrible. Like, it's really bad. But lyrically,
sounds like dinner was late at the dog pound.
It does. I mean, if he had just written music for other musicians, I think he could have had a really nice career, but he wanted to be a star, and that's all he cared about.
All right, so I have a little surprise to end things here with. We're running very short on time, but before we play ourselves out with some select Manson clips, and hear a few interesting things before this broadcast ends, I do have a question for you, Leah, which you're not expecting, and I've not prepped you for. So I want an honest answer. You had admitted in the last episode, in fact, you were accused by Berg that this is what was going to happen, that you would have been converted by the Manson family had you been in one of these areas of California at the time. My question for you is, how would he have gotten to you the most effectively? What would he have had to say? What angle would he have had to come in from? Or would it have been enough for Bobby Bosley to wink at you and say, come with me?
In my 20s, my early 20s.
Yeah, you're one of the Manson girls, early 20s, right? You ran away from home kind of thing.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like late teens, early 20s. First, it probably would have been Bobby. Bobby would have worked on me for sure. Tex might have too. There was a point where Tex was pretty
you like Tex, eh?
I do like Tex. When he was a little cleaner, not when he was gross, but
I think Tex Watson looks like the Frankenstein monster myself, but okay, you kind of dig him. That's all right.
There's something sexy about Tex. But like Jeff said, he didn't buy the package we sold. I did. So not only am I a salesperson, but I'm also easily sold. I absolutely would have been a Manson follower, and I think it would have been a lot of the slippy idea. So they call themselves slippies, not hippies. And because they were going to slip under society, and they like the free love and all that kind of stuff. I definitely would have been down for that. The communal living, the partying, the orgies. I would have been all about it, like all of it. Probably the orgies. That's what would have got me the most.
And that is when Leah would have become Icky of the Manson family. That would have been her nickname, as we discussed last episode. Well, since we are running completely out of time, next Tuesday, for the next deep dive, we are going to offer you a special treat. When Jeff and I were in the Outer Banks late at night, we decided to share a bottle of peach-flavored Jim Beam whiskey, and we had a very philosophical, long-form conversation about good and evil and how politics is related. And I have to say, it was one hell of a conversation. We're both kind of drunk. It's real good. That'll be our next deep dive episode. You're gonna hear the slightly edited version of that conversation for an episode, and of course we'll be back on Friday with the news. But did any of you guys have anything else before we round it out with some Manson quotes?
No, I think we covered it all.
Jeff, anything else?
No, I don't think so.
All right, Mounts, you good?
Good.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in to our limited series, The Unholy Trinity of Quotes. This is going to be the unlimited trinity of quotes here in a second when we play them. The Unholy Trinity of Cults, which has been a blast to do, and we look forward to many more series like this in the future, where we take a deep dive into a subject and hopefully present you with some binge listening. We hope that is something that we can bring you down the road. Until then, Jeff, they're entitled to those opinions, right?
But not their own facts, yeah. Oh, and I do have one last thing to say. The Catholic religion is the biggest cult of them all. Goodbye.
Not even a fuck you to Manson?
Fuck you, religion. Fuck you, religion.
Fuck you, religion.
We talk about Manson for 2 hours, and he says "fuck you" to the Catholic Church. There's no winning with this guy.
Fuck you, Bugliosi. That's right.
All right, she hasn't changed her tune. All right, well, fuck you to all who deserve to be fucked.
In other words, the people who've been judging, these people who've been judging, they're going to be judged as they've judged. They're using the courtrooms to murder people, innocent people. And this whole trial has just been the truth on trial. They don't have anybody on trial other than their children and the truth.
Not very long before the actual murders, he said that he felt that he was going to have to take the lead and show the blacks how it needed to be done, that they weren't doing it. Since then, I found out that he'd had some kind of a bum dope deal with somebody and he'd shot someone, so I assumed.
Do you know why they picked Sharon Tate?
No.
Is that purely bad luck?
I know now that it had something to do with Terry Melcher. But at the time, each of us knew very little of what was going on.
When they came back from the killing, and did they describe them to you?
Pat did the next morning.
Were you distraught?
No. I was because it was sad and tragic that violence had to occur. But I wasn't questioning that it had to occur.
So you felt it was justified. Sorry that you had to kill people, but it was justified to make a statement.
Yeah.
I can do anything I want to you people at any time I want to, because that's what you've done to me. How am I going to feel remorse? What am I supposed to feel remorse about? Everyone says, you feel no remorse. I said, can't you understand I'm not guilty of anything? Yeah, it would reflect. If you hold the negative up to the light, you don't see the light, you just see the negative. So I'm a reflection of your negative. There's no doubt about that.
you.